What's going on, guys? This is episode 20 of Dispersing the Cloud, and again, I'm a week late. Last week I got behind, and I'm still catching up, but I have everything prepped for tomorrow's episode of Dispersing the Cloud. So we're going to pretend that this week hasn't happened yet, and I'm just going to fill you in as if it was last week. So I apologize, guys, but let's jump into it because I have a limited amount of time, and let's get it down. So I drove to LA last week, and that's where I was. I had a book reading at one of the schools down there, and I'm kind of trying to set up. I'm trying to set it up to where next school year anyway, in September, I can cruise down there for a couple weeks. I got some people who are calling schools for me and trying to get me into the school districts down there, and this was kind of a preliminary visit for me to do that. It went well. They liked the book. They liked my message. And I think we're going to set up a couple book reads in the Riverside area. And if you guys were following me on social media and Instagram, you saw that I was over at UFC Gym. And UFC Gym is amazing to me. Every time I go to Riverside, they hook me up with a couple days. All right. I think I fixed the wireless connection. Sorry about that. If you guys were following me on social media, you know that I got to wrestle with Ian. And UFC Gym really hooks it up when I go down, and they let me work out. And that used to be my home. I used to be a personal trainer there. So thank you to UFC Gym for always taking care of me. I met with Sandals Church, and we're trying to maybe work something out to where I can come and play in August on the tour with Awaken Worship and More Than Rules, my band. And I also got to meet with one of my professors, Professor Pearson, Dave Pearson. He now runs the College of Health and Science over at Cal Baptist. And kind of talking with him about possibly doing some conferences with them, and just kind of catching up. He's been a pretty big influence on me, and he's always helped me further my career when I was doing personal training and all the above. So it's always good to catch up with him. And then my buddy David is getting married. Obviously, he already got married, but remember, this hasn't happened yet. So he's getting married Saturday. And then I got a following wedding in Valley Springs that I will do tomorrow. See how I did that. So process, let's jump into book stuff and process. I'm tired of no music. I've been doing these book reads, and on all my drives I listen to books, and I'm just tired of not having music. Being a musician, it's rough, but growing all the businesses that I run and all my different projects, the tools that I've picked up from reading these books have been irreplaceable. I'm seeing more and more that CEOs who read 60 books a year, there's a reason they're making $400 million a year, because one, this takes a lot of time to do books and to really take notes and gain something from them, but the tools that you gain from them, it's ridiculous. It really has increased my drive and increased my revenue and all the above. Sleep is key. I have a tendency to get home, be tired, and play video games, surf the web, do stuff that I want to do, rather than shutting down and restarting for my next day. And if I don't get any sleep, then I end up sleeping in till like 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I know you guys think that that's not sleeping in, but that's really sleeping in, because then you don't get your workout in for the day, you don't get those endorphins, and then you don't have as much energy throughout the day. So I started with my buddy David Watson. He's a part of Awaken Worship. We started making phone calls at night to make sure we're getting to bed by like 10. If we're still up at 10, there's a problem. And then waking up real early, 5:30, and getting our workouts in, and making sure that we are driven, because with the tour really just like hanging over us right now, there's a lot of things that still need to be done, and we need to be as productive as possible. So the book of this week, there were two of them: Boomerang by Michael Lewis, and Happiness Hypotheis by Jonathan Haidt. I'm probably saying your name wrong, Jonathan. Sorry, you'll probably never watch this video, so who cares? I'm going to start with Happiness Hypothesis. Decent book. I'm going to give it 4 stars. The elephant. The book talks about this idea that we have 2 different people inside of us, right? There's an elephant and then there's the rider. The rider is like our consciousness of, I want to do this today. And the elephant is like, kind of does whatever he wants or she wants, right? And this is very interesting because the book even refers to Paul in Romans. And it's not a Christian book by any means. It really is trying to explain how to be happy outside of religion, outside of any other, this book would refer to it as a crutch. And so it refers to Paul, and Paul saying, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things that I don't want to do, I keep doing. And the book would say this is a reference to the quote-unquote elephant, this subconscious beast of a thing that just kind of goes through the jungle. And so the book gives you some tools to train the elephant, and it kind of jumps back to, I'm jumping the gun on my notes, but it just works. It jumps back to Happiness Hypothesis. Happiness Hypothesis. It jumps back to, that's why you stick to your notes. Stick to your notes. It jumps back to the power of habit. I don't know if you guys, I don't think I ever reviewed that book, but I read that book last year, The Power of Habit. And it really breaks down how your brain works and how to train your brain. A lot of the same stuff. And again, that's another great book. If you have not read that, The Power of Habit, by Charles, I think it's Duhigg? It can't be Duhigg. It's got to be like something like that. But Duhigg. Great book by him. And this book reminded me a lot of that. So does adversity really make you stronger was one of the questions that the book's asking us. And if it does make you stronger, would you change your adversity? I mean, you can jump back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, talks a lot about this. The advantage of disadvantage, right? Would I change the fact that I am dyslexic? No way, because that made me way more personable. It made me have to get out of my comfort show as a really shy kid and start talking to people, and now I'm exactly the opposite of shy. And once I tackled my dyslexia, then it like made me like a superhuman who's really comfortable talking in front of people and outgoing and creative, who also can intake information and be highly productive on the left side of the brain kind of area. So it asks this question: would we really change those things? And obviously, as you read more and more books, as I read more and more books, some of the topics, they just really start bleeding over and referencing other books that I have read, and so it's really kind of nice to see these common themes going throughout these books. I don't think I would change any adversity that I've seen, but it's one of those things like I have a nephew, I don't have any children, but I do have a nephew. Man, I really hope he's not dyslexic, right? Because it was rough for me growing up. And then one of the things that kind of stood out to me in this book, because again it refers to religion of all sorts as a crutch. It was kind of disheartening for me because there's a gross misunderstanding of Christianity. The book talks a lot about prescribing rules to people to get them to fall in line and to be quote unquote happy. And I think it's a huge misunderstanding with Christianity as a whole. You guys know, if you watch a little bit of this stuff, or if you follow me, you know that I run a music ministry called More Than Rules. And the West has taken Christ's words and they have slapped rules on it. And that's how people perceive Christianity. And I felt really bad that this particular author perceives Christianity as a prescription of rules. I was talking to one of my buddies who is a pastor over at First Baptist, and I've now coined the phrase pharisaical. And it's like a pharmacy and Pharisee. You add those together and you get this pharisaical prescription that we have given people. And it says, like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. God will love you, then you'll be happy, right? And that's kind of how people understand Christianity, and that's kind of how this author understands it. One of the books that I read last week, Unfinished, which was a spirituality book, talked about this idea that if you are just a hunk of meat on a planet spinning through the universe, right? It talked about how you would feel completely depressed because you would have there's no reason for you to be here. And Unfinished explains that through a larger purpose. And I thought it was ironic that this book also, Happiness Hypothesis, explains it through a larger purpose, although they explain it as you tricking yourself into having a larger purpose, when I truly believe that we do have a larger purpose in life. So I found the conclusion of both books to be ironically the same when each author is approaching it differently. So that's pretty much what I took away from Happiness Hypothesis. Again, I give it 4 stars, even if I don't 100% agree with the book. I think there's some amazing tools inside this book that you can use to improve your life, and that's the amazing thing about reading all these different books. Even if you don't agree with 100% of each book, there's a guy that I don't particularly like, Tai Lopez. I don't necessarily like him because I think he's just always trying to sell. But he does make one very good point, that you can always pull a great idea out of a book, so which is why you should be reading every day. Jumping into the second book, Boomerang by Michael Lewis, and I really got to rush this, guys, because I got to get to my next location. We're filming today. We're not filming today. We're filming next week. Remember, this is a 2-week-old video. Boomerang by Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is a great author. He also wrote Flash Boys, if you want to read that, about the 2008 market crash, and this is almost like a second to this. So in 2008 market crash, a lot of people shorted the housing market, and shorting basically means that you're betting against the housing market. And so one of the guys who actually bet against the housing market started shorting governments, right? And so he was looking at governments who were showing the same trends as the housing market did. So he looked at Iceland, he looked at Greece, and now we know that Iceland and Greece both collapsed, right? And so we're looking at these trends, and debt. Debt is the main thing. As we accumulate debt, right, how do we see the trend to where there's a breaking point? And GDP is gross domestic product, right? When your debt becomes, I think it's 300% of GDP, meaning I'm bringing in $100. I owe $300 each month. I'm bringing in $100 each month, but I owe $300 each month. There's this tipping point where there is no return, meaning once it reaches over 300 and something percent, there is no return. I think the number was a little greater than 300, because I think the U.S. is actually right around 300 of GDP. There just becomes a point where you cannot get past the debt that you are bringing in. And obviously Iceland and Greece, they went through these things, and this book is extremely interesting in looking at trends, has some great stories in it of Arnold has a bunch of quotes in from him when he took over California and trying to fix the California fiscal problem. California is already there. California is done as far as debt goes. We can't spend our way out of debt, which is pretty much our strategy right now. And although we are one of the largest economies in the world, we're just spiraling down. This was a great quote from the book. There's a corruption here, right? And it's not just a financial corruption, it's a corruption of the attitude towards public service. I mean, they have this idea that these people are lifetime public servants, but they're making $120,000 a year, which I completely understand, because they have to have a house in Washington, they have to have a house here. I get it. I understand that it's expensive, but when you have politicians that are paying 13% on their taxes, Bernie Sanders, supposed to be a saint, 13%. Come on, bro, you're not a public servant. I pay 35% on my taxes, and I'm not making 120. So there really needs to be a rethinking of how we look at public service, and there needs to be a rethinking of this big machine called the American economy can fail and will fail. based on trends if we don't change it. This was another great quote. Again, if we refuse to regulate ourselves, our environment will do the regulating. And it's this idea that the market will slap you in the face every single time. And if you refuse to look at the trends of the market, then the market's just going to kick you in the teeth. Last on this book, leverage buys you a glimpse of prosperity that you have not yet earned. When we borrow massive amounts of money to gain stuff that we have not yet earned, it's different to borrow money than put it into an investment, because that's completely different. You borrow money, I'm doing that threefold right now. You know, I'm borrowing money to start the wedding planning business. I borrowed money to get my book published, and I'm borrowing money to produce the album, right? Those are okay because those are investments that are going to gain me more money in the long run. Borrow money till you're blue in the face when you're building something, but you can't just borrow money to have stuff that you want, to gain a glimpse of the prosperity in the future, right? So I'm building 3 different businesses. I really want to buy a van right now, right? I want to buy a van to put all my equipment in. I need a van to put all my equipment in, right? So I can travel the country and do books, do music, and do all this different stuff. And even for the wedding planning business, to move things back and forth from venues and all the above. But it's a glimpse of prosperity that I don't yet have. America has this trend. California has this trend. Recognize your environment before it kicks you in the teeth. The next book is The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. Again, these guys, sometimes they watch the videos, sometimes they don't. I actually had, I forget who it was, one of the authors that I reviewed like 3 or 4 weeks ago watched this blog, which was kind of cool, and was pumped that I did it, because sometimes I tag them on Twitter. Anyway, that's coming up next. We're looking at organizations and how to make them healthy. Upcoming this next week, and I got like 5 minutes, I have a camp meeting for Camp Barnabas because I'm going out of state and helping out with that camp. That's going to be awesome. Setting up some more studio time, the final studio time for the recording. I'm fishing with Chad Mendez because Dan Roof from this church, actually, that I'm sitting in, Finding Community, bought a fishing trip to help us out with the album, and Chad donated some of that to help us out, so we're going fishing. That's going to be a blast. My birthday is next week. Word of inspiration from the day, and I'm out of here, guys. On that book read, this is the best quote I've heard in freaking forever. I'm setting up to do the book reads, and we're in this classroom, and the kids are kind of scattered around. There's this kid standing in the corner, and I actually read for EEP kids. I don't know how to say that, but basically they're kids who have been labeled by the schools as not as smart. Most of them are dyslexic or have some learning disability, which means they're extremely highly creative. So it was a blast to hang out with them. They're people just like me, right? This kid's standing in the corner, and the teacher keeps calling his name. You need to get over here. You need to get over here. And he turns around and he says, "Hey, I'm trying to daydream about burritos over here, okay?" And I was like, dude, this kid is going to be like a freaking genius, like creator, if the school system doesn't screw him up. That was the best quote I've ever heard in my entire life. I'm trying to daydream about burritos over here, okay? That's all I'm trying to do. I don't know why you're hassling me with this stuff about sitting down, because there's some magic happening over here. That's all I got for you guys. I got to get out of here. I will talk to you actually next week. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Later.